So lots going on with the IRS right now. Not only are we in a government shutdown, we've had 7 IRS commissioners this year so far. And who knows what's going to happen. It's really been a mess all year. There's questions of when will you get your refund checks? Will you even get refund checks? What happens if you submit your return by paper instead of electronically? They're not issuing refunds by check anymore, only electronically. What happens there? All of these things going on. We have the absolute perfect person to discuss all this, who was the IRS Commissioner a year ago and at the beginning of this year. And that is Danny Werfel. Danny, it is absolutely an honor and a privilege to have you on the Wealthability Show.
Thanks, Tom. It's a lot going on, so anything I can do to help provide some degree of a light out of the darkness, I'm happy to talk about it.
Well, that's what we need. We need a little light out of this darkness. So, first of all, what the heck's going on at the IRS that we cannot keep a commissioner?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's very concerning because separating out the IRS or government, public sector, private sector, stable leadership at the top is critical for the success of any organization. The larger and more complex the organization, the more important it is to have stable leadership. And then something as high stakes as the IRS, the tax authority, is an absolutely instrumental part of any functioning country, democracy. It doesn't have to be popular. I know that there's many thriving nations around the world. They all have in common a tax authority that is not popular but high functioning, and we want the same. And so, there is a lot of volatility right now across the federal government. The Trump administration, starting with DOGE and continuing forward, is making massive changes to the scale, the scope, the ways of working, the way in which political appointees or people that serve at the pleasure of the president operate in the government bureaucracy. And all of that has apparently manifested itself at the IRS as a significant amount of turbulence, not just with the commissioner role, but with the various leaders underneath the commissioner as well have seen a lot of turnover. And Tom, a lot of people ask me the question, so I'll anticipate you'll ask it to me too. Like, why does it matter? Why is stable leadership important? What can go wrong if you have 6 commissioners in 10 months? The way I'd like to describe it, Tom, is giving you a window inside the commissioner's office. A fair amount of the job is problem solving.
Right.
And solving those problems means that people are waiting for less time on the phones. People are waiting for less time in line outside of walk-in centers. People are waiting less time for their refund or their credit or to get some issue resolved with the IRS. What I heard constantly from taxpayers is dealing with the IRS is stressful and scary. And I was like, I want to try to make it less stressful and less scary if we can. But one of the things that's in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which is in law, is the right to fair customer service or effective customer service and the right to closure. You don't want these issues outstanding, okay? So a lot of times these problems that emerge that slow the gears of the IRS down can be solved at the front line. Sometimes it bumps up to the next line and the next line. Sometimes it can be solved by the deputy commissioner. Sometimes it has to be solved by the commissioner, him or herself. And so I would find that multiple times a day, the meetings that I had in my office were about solving those problems. And here's where unstable leadership can manifest itself in a real negative way. First, it creates confusion. Who decides what? what types of problems need to be brought to the commissioner versus the deputy commissioner versus the chief taxpayer services officer, and all the various layers of a large bureaucracy like the IRS. So you want clarity on which problems go where for solving. And then you need access. You need to be able to get on the person's calendar. The longer you wait to get on the calendar, if the longer it takes for that knot to be untied, if you will. And while you're waiting for that knot to be untied, the people that are suffering are those that are still on hold or waiting for their check or stressed out because the issue that they have with the IRS is not getting resolved quickly enough. And there are other reasons why having a lack of stable leadership can be challenging. You'd have a misunderstanding of what the priorities are, what the plan is, which reforms are going to take place in what order, moving resources to those reforms, solving problems and clearing the runway for those changes or those improvements to happen. So any organization is constantly dealing with both problem solving or whack-a-mole, if you will, but they're also, if they're a high-performing organization, they're on a continuous improvement journey. They're figuring out how to get faster, more effective, more modern, and stable leadership is an essential precondition for quick and rapid problem solving and an effective improvement journey.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, Danny, because what we noticed in the tax practitioners community prior to you coming on was very big backlogs of tax returns being processed, very big backlogs of getting on the phone and talking to people. And we actually saw, yeah, and I'm going to give you credit for this because we saw a lot of improvement in the short time that you were IRS commissioner. And then the other thing we saw improvement too, of course, is technology. IRS technology has not exactly kept up to the standards of this century. Frankly, still in my mind, still back in the 20th century, and yet you were making headway in that technology, which is truly the way to reduce the size of the government is going to be technology, particularly the IRS, because I've long felt like, well, returns could be processed via technology, audits could be handled better, actually more effectively, not just more efficiently through technology. And people are probably less afraid of getting a letter in the mail than they are of actually talking to an IRS auditor. So, what do you see happening? So now we have Steve Bessent, Treasury Secretary, Acting Commissioner. We have this new CEO role, which I'm dying to hear your thoughts on what in the world this even is. Is this an attempt to eliminate the need for a commissioner? What is the point of the CEO, and what do you see coming for the future? I know that's a lot to unpack, but let's start with, what do you see that's going on right this minute? I mean, granted, we're in a government shutdown as of the minute we're recording this, but what do you see what's going on right now, and what do you see the role? What do you see as the role of this new CEO, and why? Why this new CEO?
Yeah, so I want to take a quick step back and say that when I arrived at the IRS, we were struggling on every performance metric.
Yeah.
Record low customer service on the phones, walk-in centers shuttered with long lines around the block, record high paper backlogs, anemic audit rates at every cohort, and stagnant technology. At the moment I arrived, I didn't see or have the vision or the ability to identify a turnkey set of technologies that could come in and fix it all. Instead, what we saw was incremental technologies. We could start expanding the document upload tool. We could add more AI to the call center and create more, kind of chatbot technologies. We could scan more paper, all incremental. So in order to plug the holes, we hired.
Right.
We hired people to start managing the paper, to get that paper backlog in. We hired people and trained them up and got them on the phone lines. And that was critical to turning things around, was a combination, mostly people heavy, with starting a journey of modernizing what I sometimes call the assembly line of tax administration. And that had very positive impact. And now what we have is a lot of layoffs and downsizing, through the deferred resignation program, or the layoffs of all the probationary employees. A lot of them were newly hired as part of our efforts to reverse these performance trends. And not yet, I'm hoping for one, but not yet a clear plan on how the technology journey is going to move more quickly than we were doing it, making it less incremental, more immediately transformational, to make up from the lost productivity of the people on those front lines. And I think what's happening, and I'm going to come to the CEO role now. I think what's happening is you get to a point, and I think Secretary Bessent, my guess is he's realizing, and I see some of the language in the president's 2026 budget about some of the concerns they start sharing in the language if they don't get certain resources reestablished and certain people rehired, that they're going to have a very rough filing season coming up.
Right.
He's, I think, realizing that they have little room for error at this point to pull off a successful filing season.
Yeah, they're as skinny as they could be for filing season.
Right. And he's super busy because the Treasury job is a huge job. And I think he needed a competent person with the right credentials to come in and run the day-to-day operations of the IRS, to make sure that that they were mitigating risk, that there was kind of an emerging challenge. Like, so for example, right now in the fall, there's a lot of readiness going on. You're still updating forms, right. You're testing technology, you're training people, all of it. It's a lot of moving pieces as you get ready for what I call opening night on Broadway of filing season opening up. And again, to make sure that readiness program functions effectively, you have to have a clarity of priorities, and clear the runway when you need to, or untie knots. And Secretary Bessent's very busy and needs someone on the ground that has the capability and the credentials to be able to untie those knots on his behalf. Everything I know about the SSA commissioner coming in is that he is extremely smart and well credentialed to be able to do this. My concern is that he also has a day job of being SSA commissioner. And so I come back to the problem. So I see two challenges, both addressable, two challenges with a new CEO. One is, remember when I said earlier that you need to know who solves which problems?
Right.
Well, this is a new role. It's never happened before, right? So they have to proactively be very clear that the role of the CEO, for example, is very similar to the deputy commissioner, or this is who reports up to the CEO. Like, they should lean in right now and be as crystal clear as they can with the precise role of the CEO and the very types of issues and questions that this CEO will resolve. Because otherwise, if it stays ambiguous, then you don't know where to bring the problem, and that delays the problem solving. The second thing that needs to happen is there needs to be an expectation of how you get to this guy who's also running the SSA, right? Because again, the longer you wait to engage and get those decisions, the longer problems fester, and the more risk you create, the risk of a system outage, the risk of a mistake on a form, or a series of correspondences going out incorrectly, or the paper backlog getting more sluggish. So all of that, I think the reason why this is happening now is because they're out of the luxury of time of waiting for a new commissioner to get confirmed, of vetting new talent that might be unknown to them that could come in and handle the job. This SSA commissioner is a known commodity. I think he's built trust and credibility inside the administration. And so this is, kind of a crunch time, and they had to make a move.
Well, and the SSA is actually known as one of the best run of the government organizations, and maybe he doesn't have maybe he's not as critical over there as he
Yeah.
would be at the IRS.
Yeah, what keeps me up at night right now is not, I think his name is Frank Bisignano, not him. What keeps me up at night is where we are on the calendar, the fact that we're in the middle of a government shutdown. So now you're asking him to climb Mount Everest with a hand tied behind his back. Um, and you've got a lot of loss of staff. It's not clear that they're going to get the budget resources that they need to hire up for filing season. The technology plan is unclear and needs to be developed. And as competent as Frank may be, he's got two jobs. So it's not ideal, obviously. And so I really think this is going to be a very huge challenge for him and the secretary to create stability from here on in, to establish strong governance inside the IRS, to seize opportunities, clear runways, untie knots. Sometimes, Tom, I use the analogy of a train system. And I do that because it's easy to understand. Like sometimes when a train breaks down, the front line can handle it and fix it. But every once in a while, the commissioner needs to weigh in order to like get the resources in place to get the train running again. Meanwhile, you have people waiting on the platform. And more people show up to that platform and they're waiting and they're waiting and it gets really crowded and unruly. And so the idea is if Secretary Bessent or the CEO need to solve the problem to get that train running again, to get those people off the platform and where they need to be, you don't want to lose time. And that's why like the IRS should not be an exciting place. It should be boring, right? And rote.
Agreed.
And there should be a bureaucracy that runs a large and sprawling operation as complex as the IRS. There should be no confusion about who decides what, how do we get on this person's calendar? What does the briefing memo looks like? How do decisions get articulated? In what format do the decisions get carried out? You drive for that stability and concreteness and roteness so that when a train breaks down, it can be seconds or minutes before the decision is made for how to deal with it, before the crowd backs up on the platforms. That's what we aimed for when I was IRS commissioner. With all the volatility at the top of the IRS, it's challenging to see how that's going to be achieved in the near term.
So let's talk about some of the actual day-to-day issues that affect our listeners, such as the government's no longer going to issue refund checks. How do you see that playing out? I mean, you have people that don't have bank accounts.
Yeah. So I always felt like there was remember I talk about this idea that we didn't have a turnkey technology solution to deal with, for example, all the paper that was coming in, right? So there were other levers that could be pulled. We could hire more people, which we did, but you could also constrain the amount of paper coming in by saying like no more paper checks coming into the IRS or no more paper checks going out of the IRS. And now and that is by definition creating a more efficient assembly line of outgoing and incoming into the IRS by eliminating the weight and the size and scale of paper that you're involved in. But that has implications, has public policy or tax policy implications. It means that, for example, the unbanked may not get access to a paper check. Or may not get access to the electronic payments and creates more complications for them. I think all of that is, there are mitigating procedures that you can put in place. You wish it was clean. You wish you could just say, okay, no more paper. And then that doesn't create ripple effects of inequities or complications or having some kind of disparate impact on certain taxpayers versus others, but it does. So what you do is you say, okay, no more paper checks, except in these very narrow situations, or if you're in this situation, we're going to set up this function or this process. And now you don't have a clean change. It's more complicated, but that's the cost of doing business. So I do think that that moving more aggressively to non-paper options makes sense as part of a larger vision of a more tech-enabled IRS, and is a way of dealing with the sheer magnitude of paper that comes in, so that you can have a more efficient organization. But I also know that creating that kind of across the board monolithic policy of no more paper will not be without pain or cost for some people. And therefore, the question is, can you, in an effective way, accommodate some of those pain points? Another good example is like people overseas, making
Right.
receiving payments, or making the international banking system
Right.
creates a lot of complications. So you have to accommodate expatriates that are dealing with the IRS as
For
well,
sure.
and there haven't always been electronic options for that. So I'm not yet sure that the IRS has dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's for that's also critical part of the readiness program, getting ready for January. And that's why every minute is important. That's why the government shut down with everything shuttered the way it is. And what's really interesting, Tom, is I was IRS Commissioner back in 2013. This was my second run at the
Right.
job, when we had I think it was like a 16-day shutdown. And I recall, as much as we did our absolute best to preserve and accept employees involved in the readiness, in particular around the IT systems and the forms changes and all of that, we still, after the 16-day shutdown, had to delay the opening of filing season by a week because it was just too disruptive.
Right. And on top of that, of course, this shutdown is happening during the October 15th deadline. So where
And the
you
same thing
get
happened. The same thing happened to us. That
where you
shutdown
get
was
the
there.
most complicated tax returns are filed in October, right? That's when the most complicated tax returns are filed. So when you are likely to have more of the issues. Now, one of the things that I appreciated when you were commissioner this last time is that you did seem to care very much about customer service. And any business owner knows that if you're not taking care of your customers, nothing else matters. And yet, I think that that was something that you were making great progress on because it was terrible before you came in. The day you walked in the door, customer service at the IRS. In fact, I thought it was not a priority. It seemed very clearly not a priority to the IRS. So how do you see that going forward? I mean, we've got a shutdown. The customer service people, they're home. They're not working at all right now. So how do you see that happening where you've got less people? Are they going to put some people to customer service because you still have to have those bodies?
Well, I'll give you some positives and negatives for what I see. I think it's a positive that Secretary Bessent has repeated his three priorities for the IRS on multiple occasions, and one is customer service. He said customer service, collections, and privacy. So the fact that's a stated priority is a positive. I also thought that in the 2026 budget, in the IRS section, there's language that talks about the importance of giving the IRS resources to hire or hire back phone assisters, because they were concerned about the implication of deteriorating customer service on our phone lines. So at least, in the statements from the secretary and some of the language and some of the publications, there is a commitment, or at least a directional anticipation of trying to maintain or improve customer service. The negative is that we don't have a concrete plan.
Mm.
What are the particular steps that are going to be taken? How are they going to measure progress? When I was commissioner, I joined in March of 2023. By early April, we had issued a 200+ page plan for all the reforms we were going to do to improve technology, improve customer service. Tom, what's funny is the criticism I received from the Republicans on that plan was it wasn't detailed enough. Yeah, even though it had all these work streams, but I welcome that criticism. I went back to the team and I was like, oh gosh, we need to add more detail. We need to send more. Well, let's add an appendix. Let's get in front of these senators or these members of Congress and answer these questions, because if 200 pages wasn't enough detail, we're going to get them more detail, right? But we don't have a plan at all right now
Mm,
in terms of what are the priorities within these broad objectives of customer service, privacy, and collections. What are the changes we can anticipate in terms of the technology in the call center or the technology on irs.gov? What are the enhancements to the individual tax account or the business tax account? How is AI going to be used to ease the burden? What steps is the IRS going to take to protect taxpayers from the growth of scams and schemes that are likely going to emerge from as AI
right.
kind of goes up exponentially? So on the good side, you have the stated priorities, you have warning signs listed in the president's budget, but on the downside, you don't have a plan. You have ongoing workforce reductions. You still see a lot of turbulence at the top of the IRS. And it's hard to be bullish right now on the performance direction of the IRS. Could I be wrong? Could this be just all the ingredients are going to come together between now and January, and it's going to be a very successful filing season, and a plan is right around the corner that I'm going to look at and say, aha, that's how they're going to do it. And that is so much smarter and better than what we had. I hope that happens. I'll be the first to celebrate, but right now I'm concerned that it's not going to happen.
So let's finish up with technology, if we can. So one of the, I guess, theories or hypothesis behind letting people go is because it forces the hand of the IRS to actually develop the technology. If you have plenty of bodies, that can be a crutch. I'm not saying it always is, but it can be a crutch. Where if you don't have those, you have no crutch. And so you're actually forced in technology. Where do you see technology having the biggest impact? I have my own thoughts on this, but where do you see it having the biggest impact, and where do you think it should, where should they start, and where should it not have an impact?
I'll give you a couple of different areas that I think are important. I'll start inside the IRS. And I know that they're working on this, and it's my understanding that this continues to be a priority, and I hope it is. There's a project called Taxpayer 360 inside the IRS, and it's all about getting the account managers and the customer service agents real-time, good access to your tax record so that you can answer questions more fluidly and more effectively. Right now, when you call into the IRS with a question or concern, the person on the other end of the line does not have one door to go to figure out what your situation is. They're looking on multiple screens. They're accessing a lot of different databases, all while trying to better understand what the Internal Revenue Manual says is the right answer for you in this moment. And so there just needs to be a cleaner interface that people inside the IRS can have that's more automated and seamless. And that's just going to create an easier phone call, an easier walk-in visit. And that means instead of seeing or speaking to 5 people an hour, you're going to speak to 8 people an hour, 9 people an hour, and that's just going to improve customer service and get those lines moving and those hold wait times down. The other important initiative is the individual tax accounts for both individuals and businesses. Look, if you go on your online bank right now, Tom, and for whatever reason you're like, gosh, I really need to see my April 2023 bank statement. You're just a few
It's
clicks
there,
away from that, right? You
right?
want to order some checks, you want to, transfer money to your brother-in-law, whatever it is, it's all at your fingertips because the technology of the online banking is not only is the interface user-friendly in most cases, the infrastructure underneath it, so that if you go and make a ATM withdrawal on your way home today for $100, by the time you get home, and even more instantaneously than that, your online account already knows you took that withdrawal, right? It's all instant.
Right.
The amount of data and process and technology interface and standardization to make that all happen is something the IRS lacks, right? And so a huge part of the technology journey is, and I stated it in this way, all taxpayers should be able to do all interactions with the IRS digitally or virtually if they choose, just like you can with your online bank. And if you do that, then you're not calling the 1-800 number of Bank of America or SunTrust or whatever nearly as often, if ever. And you're certainly not going to a bricks and mortar bank anymore the way you used to, because it's all at your fingertips. So that is a second priority. And then the third is scams and schemes. And I really do think there's an opportunity to put into your pocket on your smartphone or on your tablet tools that can allow you to detect when that text that's coming in from an IRS agent that's really not an IRS agent, or the tax shelter or scam that's too good to be true, that you have tools in your pocket that are government produced that can tell you, red flag, this isn't legit. So you got to fight fire with fire. The scamsters are using technology and mobile technology to get you comfortable in going down their trap. The government has to fight that by giving you tools that make you comfortable in knowing that trap is there. So those are three different examples that would be on my wish list for when and if the administration creates here's our technology plan for the IRS blueprint.
And do you see that going on? I mean, from what I'm sure you maintain ties within the IRS, are you seeing that those initiatives that you started are continuing?
It's a murky answer. I'm not sure. I think in some cases, yes, in some cases, no. There's open questions about the budget because so much of the Inflation Reduction Act funds have been returned. And if you look at the budget and the latest, House and Senate marks, they either hold or cut technology funding for the IRS. And so is there a will? I mean, I'm going to take the Secretariat and Doge and other public statements that they do want to tech enable the IRS. So yes, sounds like there's a will. Is there a way? Well, you need the resources, you need stable leadership to kind of drive these practices and projects through. You need expertise inside the IRS. And are they creating an environment, a work environment where they're retaining and attracting talent, or are they chasing that tech talent away? All of these things kind of create a balance sheet that makes me a little bit more bearish on the direction. Haven't given up hope by any stretch. What I think we really need to see is that plan. What are the tech priorities? How does it match up with the budget that they have and they've requested? And what steps are they taking to ensure that the IRS is a place where technical experts, really want to come work and help taxpayers with new tools that are going to make this entire tax system easier and less stressful to navigate.
That makes sense. To finish up, Danny, any recommendations that you might give to taxpayers to navigate through this over the next 3 to 12 months?
Well, look, if you can, first of all, I always say, if you can afford to engage with a trusted tax professional, I think that's always a smart thing to do, especially if you have a complicated situation. I would be really, really cautious about deals on social media or that you see
Amen.
or hear on the radio that sound too good to be true. Those are usually no risk for the person selling you the service and a lot of risk for you. And so, don't get your tax advice on social media is something that I always say. Be aware that when the IRS is positioned as having less resources and kind of celebrated as being diminished, that's when industries will emerge with, the tax shelter that seems too good to be true, or the exotic deduction that is going to, give you a tax refund of your dreams this year. All of that are things to absolutely be on the lookout for. I would ask taxpayers to, understand their civic duty, to pay what they owe and not a penny more, to play by the rules. Whether you think the traffic cops are no longer monitoring the highway, don't speed, and don't speed recklessly. I think it's important. The reason why you comply with your tax obligation is not just because of the risk of getting caught.
Right.
It's because we each have a responsibility, a patriotic responsibility to this nation to play by the rules that Congress has enacted. And if you want a change in your tax status, call your congressperson, but don't assume that a reduced IRS is an opening or permission structure to start evading your taxes.
Well, I would second everything you said there. First, don't take your, don't get tax advice on social media. Boy, there's a lot of bad stuff out there.
Yeah.
Get a good tax professional. Amen to that. Particularly for business owners who tend to have more complicated things. And I love that you emphasize, hey, you don't have to pay a penny more than you owe. Just pay what you owe. And that's actually a good point to leave on. Is that with a kind of seemingly disconnect between getting refunds and paying taxes, as close as you can get to actually paying in what you actually owe is better than either having way too much underpaid or way too much overpaid. That's been my experience. And I want to just big shout out to our guest today, Danny Werfel. Danny, I will admit that you are my favorite IRS commissioner of the past 20 years. So I think what you were doing was great. My wife and I both were very sad to see you go. But I understand you're working on some cool stuff on civics lessons for Americans.
Yeah,
Can you comment on that? I'd love.
Yeah. When I left government on January 20th, my phone started ringing with questions. I not only was the IRS commissioner, but I also served as a leader in the White House budget office for many years. And so, as DOJ was making their cuts, as questions were being raised about, whether fraud or error is a basis to eliminate USAID, and then obviously all the IRS questions, data sharing with ICE, the impact of these staff cuts, potential threats of removing tax exempt status for universities. My phone just started ringing off the hook from all walks of life, members of Congress, litigators, students doing research at universities, .orgs that were going to lose their grant funding. And in talking to all these people, I just realized that there's a lot that a lot of people just don't understand about the government, how it works, when it succeeds, when it fails. These things aren't monolithic. The government, you could say, well, gosh, the government's so corrupt. Well, maybe it was corrupt in one situation, but in 99 others, it wasn't, right? And so let's go and not do a one size fits all approach to deal with that corruption. Let's figure out where the corruption may have happened, or the government was wasting money. Okay, maybe it was wasting money in these 2 or 3 areas, but it wasn't in these other areas. It's actually doing really good work. And so, government is imperfect like anything else, but it also is essential. And that's why people are upset with the government shutdown. It's it's just funny. For months we heard we got to really take a chainsaw to government, and then now that it's shut down, people are like, hey, wait a minute, the air traffic control, the flights are delayed and the parks are closed, and these checks are going to be delayed, and it's we don't want to return to the Wild West where there's lawlessness. We do need to. And so I'm splitting time between Johns Hopkins School of Government and Policy and Duke University Sanford School of Public Policy, and most of my work orients around just this broad question of what's the right way to give America a civics lesson.
Well, that would be great. I'm looking forward to that book when it comes out. When it does come out, we'll get you back on the Wealthability Show, because I think that's something that's completely missing in our educational system right now. I see it in the people I talk to every day, and that's why we do shows like this. And so grateful, Danny, to have you on. Thank you for taking your time. When we understand what's going on at the IRS, it does make, actually, it's a sleep at night issue for us, as well as how do we actually navigate it? Because when we can navigate it better, like we say on the Wealthability Show, we're always going to make way more money and pay way less tax. We'll see y'all next time. Thanks for listening to the Wealthability Show. If today's episode gave you a new perspective, remember this: the tax law is not your enemy. It's a roadmap. And when you know how to follow it, you can build real, lasting wealth. If you're a business owner or investor who's tired of overpaying taxes, the Wealthability Accelerator is your next step. You'll have the opportunity to work directly with me for 80% less than my standard rate. And I'll personally guide you through how to change your facts so that you can change your tax. Go to wealthability.com/bonus and apply today. Remember, it's not just what you make, it's what you keep.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.